And we've got three fierce intellects, but who are also equally passionate about social, political, and economic change. And I'm hoping that we can, as the foundation and as a pioneer in the struggle, to actually also pioneer thought about how we take these two clauses of the Freedom Charter, which are the two which appear to be the most neglected thus far in the way in which our society has evolved. So we can talk about the levels of inequality, we can talk about where and how it's come to be that we're such an unequal society. But I want to really focus, and would like our panelists to focus on four key aspects. The first is, as Ismail has posed the question, is the Freedom Charter still relevant? I mean, isn't it curious that the lesser number of people you have drawing up a document, the more complicated, complex, and ununderstandable it is. The greater the number of people you have drawing up the document, the clearer, the simpler, and the more understandable it is. So, but is this thing still relevant? Do we still need it? I mean, it's been replaced by the Constitution. This is what must guide our public government and our public governance and the way in which we distribute resources in society. We then have something which tries to instrumentalize this. It is the mechanics by which this is supposed to happen. So, if we have these, why do we need this? That's my first question to you guys. Why do we need this? Why is it relevant? The second is that what's the relationship between these three pieces of paper? And it's unfortunate that they go in ascending order rather than descending order. Because you look at this, and then you look at this. What is the relationship between the three? Can we find an expression of the Freedom Charter in the South African Constitution? And can we find an expression of the Freedom Charter more properly in this complicated National Development Plan? So that's the second. The third broad area I want to ask, and particularly this is for you, Goolam, given that you are here representing the wealth that we all want to share, is are the clauses in the Freedom Charter a disincentive to investment? Is it driving away investment? Is it something which is constraining growth? Because there's some people who argue that if you implement the economic clauses of the Freedom Charter, you will provide a significant disincentive for people to invest in this country. And lastly, I hear everyone continuing, including the President of the Republic, talking about this, what I would consider a nonsense term called economic freedom. Does it exist? Can it exist? So let's kick off with that. And with the first panelist I would like to have is Professor Stephen Friedman, who's obviously no stranger to all of you, who's director of the Sandton. Well, Stephen, of course you're not a stranger. Everyone knows you. You're not only famous, you're also infamous. Goolam is just rich. But of course he's becoming more famous. And then we'll have Mandla after you. But Stephen is also, apart from being the director of the Center for the Study of Democracy, has also just brought out a book on Harold Walpy. And so you're intimately familiar with these economic clauses and where they come from. So Steve, if you wouldn't mind to talk a little bit about that, and also don't forget the 4 questions that I posed. So over to you, Steve. And please don't, guys, take it as disrespect, but I might intervene because that's my role here as the provocateur. So, Steve, go ahead.
Thanks, Ebrahim. So sorry, the rule is you don't give us time, we just ramble and then you cut us off at the knee.
Well, I might interject, but I think I'll give you 10 minutes.
10 minutes? I'm an academic, I can't ask people to pass the salt in under 15. Okay. Do my best.
It's nice to hear.
All right. Okay, well, I'll cut out all the jokes, etc. Simply to say that I'm really trying to work out whether fierce intellect is a compliment or an insult. Yeah, what I said I would do is based on the work on, which is not only a book on Harold Walpy, it's basically a book on radical social thought in the apartheid era, is to say a few things about what I think the Freedom Charter is, the economic clauses are about, and where we are in relation to those clauses at the moment. So, in effect, I think that the Freedom Charter was, and I think that that's pretty, certainly when I was researching the War People, that pretty much became a consensus among the sources I was looking at, that the Freedom Charter is an attempt to codify the idea of a national democratic revolution. And the idea, for our purposes, seeing that I only have 3 minutes or whatever this man's giving me, I can't go into all the details, but in a sense, the idea of a national democratic revolution is that you would reach a stage in which minority rule in the economy would no longer exist. In other words, the majority of South Africans who were enslaved because of their race would no longer be restricted. There would be an entirely race-free access to economic opportunity. That's what I think the intention was. Now, if you were a nationalist, as many people in the ANC were, not nationalist in the white nationalist sense, but if you believed simply in national liberation, then obviously the National Democratic Revolution was something you could support very wholeheartedly, because the idea of an economy which did not serve the white minority was something very consistent with what you believed. If you were in the Communist Party, then you subscribed to the theory of colonialism of a special type, which meant that what you were engaged in was a struggle to defeat white rule in the economy as well as the society, which at some future date would be followed by a struggle for socialism. So in effect, this was the uniting factor between Marxists and non-Marxists within the Congress Alliance. The idea that what was being striven for, what was being the objective was an economy in which there would no longer be minority rule. Now that in a sense to me answers these questions about whether it was a socialist document or not. I mean, there are immense debates about this, as you will imagine, which are very interesting, which I try to deal with in the book. But in effect, the argument which justified these, which underpinned these clauses, was that they were not socialist in the sense that they were simply looking for a society in which minority rule would be defeated in the economy, but that if you wanted to defeat minority rule in the economy, you had to take some fairly aggressive measures in order to do that. So in other words, the sections of the Charter which deal with nationalization were seen as essential not to creating a socialist society, but to create a non-racial society and economy, because it was felt that concentrations of white economic power were so entrenched that you couldn't get rid of them simply by opening up the economy to all races. You had to actually intervene using the authority of the state to change the racial ownership patterns which had existed before that time. Now, the important point about this is that if we are debating today whether the objectives of the Charter's economic clauses are in the process of being met, the question that very often gets asked by people on the left, which is, are we on the route to a socialist society, is not the appropriate question to ask, not if you're talking about these clauses. The question you really need to be asking is, are we on the way to ending minority rule in the economy? Now, as somebody who spends quite a bit of time trying to understand how change works, I think we can take off the table immediately the idea that these clauses have failed, or that this has not been achieved because there is still substantial minority power in the economy, which there quite clearly is. The racial minority is extremely powerful in the economy today, because change of this sort doesn't take place in 20 years. However, I think the worrying question is, are we on a path which suggests that we are heading towards an economy in which there will not be this kind of minority power? And I'm afraid that much of the work that I and some colleagues have been doing, wearing another hat, and that's another book that's going to come out fairly shortly, is to answer the question, I'm afraid, in the negative. And in effect, what we're saying is this. If you're interested in the academic angle to this, we use the idea of what is called path dependence. And path dependence is how societies can change quite substantially, but still remain on the course that they were on before they changed. And if you want to take path dependence and put it into terms which I think everybody can understand, think of South Africa in 1994 as what it was, which is think of the South African economy as what it was, which was an economy run by an exclusive club, the members of which club were only white people. That was our reality in 1994. Some of us would argue that what has happened in the last 20 years is that this exclusive club, consisting only of white people, has taken on new members, but the club is still there. Now, what that does not mean, and I think this needs to be underlined 100 times because that's very much part of the current debate, that does not mean that nothing in South Africa has changed economically in 20 years. That would, in my view, be an absurd argument. Among other things, what has happened in the last 20 years is this very amorphous but important concept of something called the black middle class has become a reality, which it wasn't before 1994. So in other words, to put it in very concrete terms, the fact that there are black people, many black people, significant numbers of black people in South Africa today who are able to access the professions, who are able to access business, who are able to access those roles in the economy is a major change over the last 20 years. Unfortunately, the club is still in place in the sense that we still have an economy which excludes a great many people. And that exclusion is illustrated, for example, I mean, there are many examples. You can look at the most obvious measures of that exclusion, which are published from time to time, which is the degree of black participation in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, or even the degree of black participation in the professions, which is still much lower than the demographics say it ought to be. But to me, what sharpens this is some of the issues which underlie some of our labour disputes at the moment. Because if you look at some of our labour disputes, I think one of the problems we have is that workers' wages are being pushed by two things. Well, they're being pushed by one thing. They're being pushed by, and that's been pretty much established, by levels of high indebtedness. But that high indebtedness is caused, I would argue, by two things, both of which are legacies of that minority economy which the economic clauses of the Charter were supposed to end. The one is that one of the consequences of our history is that South Africa is a society in which the decent human being is supposed to be somebody who owns a particular range of consumer goods. Bear in mind that the 2011 census tells us that there are 1 million, or there were in 2011, 1 million more households in this country who own television sets than own refrigerators. And that tells you something interesting about people's priorities in a society in which you are judged by the consumer goods you own. In that context, obviously, when working people cannot afford those consumer goods, they borrow in order to buy those consumer goods, and they get into difficulty as a result. The other reason for high indebtedness, which is also a legacy of our past, if you like, what I've just described is the inequality legacy. The poverty legacy is that we can't agree on the numbers, and nobody knows, but it's pretty well established that among black people particularly, each salary feeds a number of unemployed, destitute, otherwise destitute relatives, what some black people today call the black tax. So if you take those two things together, you have a situation in which our labour bargaining system is being placed under a great deal of stress by two of the legacies of the past. So because Ebrahim's been quite passionate up to now, but he's getting very twitchy because I've worked with him for a long time, so when Ebrahim gets twitchy. I'm just going to sum up by saying that I think that we could discuss the reasons for it, etc. I think that we are unfortunately still on the path of an economy run by an exclusive club. I think that we need to get out of that path, very obviously, and I think that anybody who takes these economic clauses seriously will want us to get out of the path. And I would argue that the only way we are going to get out of that path is by a process of negotiation. That in effect, the crucial mistake we made as a society in 1994 is that we didn't finish the process. We negotiated the redistribution of political power in 1994 and then in effect placed the redistribution of economic power on hold. I would argue that that redistribution of economic power has to be negotiated in a similar way to the way in which the redistribution of political power was negotiated. So thank you for your patience. I will now shut up.
Thanks, Steve, but please don't complain. This was just your first shot. You'll have another shot. You'll have another shot. Okay, you know the little cues. So.
Great evil presence coming down.
And we have worked together for a long time, which explains why I'm still reliant on the former MEC who was in control of the resources that we were supposed to share. But here we are, waiting to still share. That's our second panelist. Former MEC for Finance in the province, in Gauteng, and board member of the Kathrada Foundation, Mandla and Nkomfe. Would you agree with Stephen? He's made two contentions as far as I can see, and that is that the clauses are actually about access to the economy, not necessarily about allocation. The second is that to the extent that there would be distribution, it would happen through policy interventions, perhaps like affirmative action, so that you broaden the club. So in effect, I suspect what Stephen was talking about was deracialization. You can challenge me in your second bite. Mandla, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me, maybe I think I'm in an ANC meeting. Say my thanks to Comrade Kathrada, and I'm sure there are quite a lot of veterans of the movement here, and in particular youth, because I think this meeting is going to be very relevant to young people, as it were. I broadly agree with Stephen on quite a whole range of things, but it has to be beyond access. It has to be beyond racial representativity, because in the last 21 years, the cleavages in South Africa have moved beyond race to class to social justice. If you look at the extent of inequality, there's quite a lot even within previously oppressed people. So there's quite a lot. So equity is one thing, but much more deeper. I like the way I prepared a document, to stand before you and talk. Now, I'm a follower of this art form called jazz. In jazz, there's improvisation on the spot.
Well, you can sit and do it.
Yeah, all that. But I think your questions have organized my thoughts in many ways. For instance, is the Freedom Charter still relevant? I'm going to start answering that, starting at the end. This weekend there is an alliance summit that is starting today up until Tuesday of COSATU, SACP and COSATU. And part of that, other than the subjective issues, problems in the movement, is this issue of radical economic transformation. Now, if there's that sentiment that is sweeping across the country and society, it points to me that we are not achieving that which we articulated in the Freedom Charter, as it were. So it's very important that we go back to that. And I think society as a whole has come, in South Africa, has come to agree that we are confronted with three challenges. It's poverty, unemployment, and inequality in the recent times. And again, it goes back to the economic clause of the Freedom Charter. It is important that the Freedom Charter remains a lodestar, because you see, without the Freedom Charter, I don't think we would be capable of dreaming and of reimagining a new society. So it's very important that it always there, but otherwise we'll just jump into all sorts of pragmatism, which can go take us in different directions and all that. So it's very important that we do all that. And in a way, I like the way Sean and the embassy has articulated all this. Because coming back to the Freedom Charter, which Sean said is one document, for me it remains at that high, lofty level, which is, remember this year, I think it's this year, we are celebrating 800 years of Magna Carta. And it's not a written constitution, but it's in the hearts and minds of the British people and English people, etc. And for me, the Freedom Charter's relevance lies exactly in that issue. So we can talk about quite a lot of issues there. So poverty, unemployment, inequality. But there are other issues that I thought in 1955 we articulated, which we didn't anticipate come 1994, because the world would have changed radically. I think in 1955 there was, I think, an ascendance of social democratic perspective as right through. Now we had a negotiated settlement in South Africa. Now, as Stephen is saying, quite a lot in the political sphere has actually been achieved. But you remember that there was not so much about negotiations about the economy. The economy's negotiations was actually partly driven by, in some instances, by big business, and hence the narrow conception of empowerment, which is the black economic empowerment. It has done quite a lot in terms of enlarging the middle class. The equity legislation has done quite a lot insofar as that is concerned. But for me, there lies some limitations of or the challenges that we have today. So that is in 1994. Now you fast track that to the NDP. Now Parliament and everybody has agreed on the NDP, except in one area. That's the economy. Now the party, COSATU, and basically saying, well, we still need to negotiate this. So what it means is that we don't have a pact, or what I would call a pact that commits all South Africans to a particular perspective on the economy, as it were. And I hope it will actually come out later on. But there are a whole range of things I thought I should also raise. I've raised the issues of poverty. I've raised the issues of unemployment, which is one issue, which is the economy, which is not growing. And most importantly, the issue of inequality. Now, as a former MEC of Finance, the important thing for resource allocation. Now, let's not make a mistake, moderator, because I think 70% of the economy in South Africa belongs to private hands, if not 80%. So that is where production takes place. That is where there has to be redistribution and all that. But as part of the state, the issue of the budget is very important. But if you look at the budget, so we've been doing very well over time, up until 07, 08, the financial crisis. I think we were at 5% of the GDP. But since then, the growth of the economy has actually been muted in many ways. So that for me, that is one problem which is acting as impediments to realize aspect of the economic clause of the Freedom Charter. So that's one area that I thought I should raise. And it puts pressures on budget, on resources. For instance, if you look at, let's say, debt to GDP, the ratio there, 0708, the debt to GDP ratio was maybe 30% or less. And that has moved, and I think it's, the Treasury guys will tell you that it's going into the 40s or so, and all that. And that in itself constrains any government to exercise national sovereignty, and as a result, realize the objectives of the clause of the Freedom Charter. I was asking a colleague here about what is the economic budget deficit and all that. Now, the international standard is that it should be about 3% or so. And I'm told we are about 3.9%. But the economists say it's still fine and all that. But cumulatively, what that says is that we don't have space to maneuver. We don't have enough resources, as it were. We'll soon be going back to, or running to the IMF and the World Bank to help us. An example, for instance, is Ghana. If you look at Ghana in the last 4 years or so, they've got all the resources, oil and all that. But maybe because of policies that they took, particularly about the wage bill. Now they've been forced to go back to the IMF. The IMF, you know, comes structural adjustment programs and all that. So these are the things that I think for us we have to take care of as we look in this thing. So in broad terms, that's your first area. On the relationship, I think there is particularly on the Constitution, Freedom Charter, and the Constitution as such. NDP will still have to do quite a lot around that. I don't think it's driving away investment, or it ought to drive away investment. I think all what the business community is looking for is transparency, is policy certainty, and all that. And again, if there is a pact, economic pact, it shouldn't be difficult that when you implement all the issues of the Freedom Charter, there will be investment, as it were. The last one, which is your questions, which is economic freedoms. I want to answer that in two sentences, or in two areas. You see, if you look at the clause itself, the last bullet point in the clause talks about all people shall have equal rights to trade where they choose to manufacture, and all trades, crafts, and professions. I think for me that's the essence of freedom. But more than that, I think it's best articulated by Ahmed Kathrada, where it's also about opportunities, where he says, I quote, various types of unfreedoms that leave people with little choice and with the opportunity of exercising their reasons agency. So for me, that's a critical area. Any economic dispensation must leave people with their right to exercise their reason agency.
Thank you, Mandla. Thanks for also picking up from where Stephen left off and then taking us conceptually right down to the empirical issues which Goolam should talk about, which are all these things: debt to GDP ratio, size of the wage bill, etc. But I want to pose this. You know, you made two fundamentally important points. The one is that there's a conceptual limit to the way in which we've negotiated the economy. And the simple reality is that there isn't a conceptual limit, it just didn't happen. Why should it happen? you know, we've negotiated political freedoms. The state is in control and command of a whole range of resources, but levels of trust in the state to do the right thing is declining. So if we enter this compact, what's to say that you'll do the right thing even if you have a greater amount of control in the economy? Why shouldn't we just leave it in private hands where they actually do provide it? And then whether we can claw our way into accessing or not is a different question, but at least it exists. At the moment, it appears as if we give you the resources, things might just not exist. And on that note, luckily we haven't been load shedding. I just thought I'd throw that in. Goolam, I mean, do you agree that if we have an economic pact, we might be able to get out of it? You guys, on the other hand, are sitting with a stockpile of 340 billion. You don't want to reinvest it. You're not creating jobs. You're not investing in new products and developments. So even if we have a pact, what are you guys going to do?
At the outset, I mean,
sorry, I'm making you speak. You know, I mean, this is about group rights, so you represent business.
Let me at the outset just be appropriate and exchange pleasantries and say good afternoon to everybody. It's a privilege to be invited to such an auspicious occasion and to share in your company. I'm also quite elevated when Ebrahim refers to me as a fierce intellect. I'm reminded when I get home tonight, my wife is going to tell me to take out the garbage.
You can multitask.
Ebrahim spoke about relevance and questioning whether there is brisk application of the Freedom Charter 60 years later. And as an economist and one perpetually training to be one, you're reminded that you have got to apply ideas and theories and thoughts in a moment in time. There may be occasions when a particular application has ripe applicability in that particular epoch or era, but it's somewhat less relevant or may require a more evolved, a more developed perspective than that which originally may have existed. So it's with that perhaps control that I make the following remarks. We do have a very contemporary version of all of the cumulative documents which espoused our aspirations and our hopes and our dreams. Now that document, which is published annually, doesn't quite have the elegance, the celebration. It has some pomp, some ceremony, but nowhere near the sense of romance and force as the Freedom Charter. And that document is the national budget. Now the national budget, as you well know, is read or presented in Parliament in February of each year. Most South Africans engage with the national budget through the speech. So an hour and a half of rendition by the finance minister, effectively in that 1.5 hours seeking to distill not just public finances, but public finances in how it relates to the aspirations, the dreams, the hopes of all South Africans, and critically within an envelope of what is financeable. Now I go on to say the budget is an hour and a half of rendition. It is probably the equivalent of the Freedom Charter in terms of its cumulative text. But that speech is also buttressed by a budget review, a document which is very similar in its thickness, perhaps not in substance, but in its thickness, to the National Development Plan. So it's a fairly substantial assembly, a fairly substantial document. And then it's further supplemented with the estimates of national expenditure. So that third piece, estimates of national expenditure, for those of you old enough to perhaps be familiar with the Yellow Pages, it's something of that magnitude in terms of capturing the commitments of every single ministry in terms of its commitments to public finances. So, also borrowing from Ebrahim's suggestion of the mechanics of exactly what represents contemporary society's hopes and dreams, how the government of the day is seeking to reconcile all of these tensions, is captured in that document, either appropriately, partially so, or perhaps promiscuously in some other respects. The Freedom Charter espoused quite substantially bold language, and it sought, at least considering the polarity of their time, to enfranchise particularly black people that were across a broad swathe of dimensions excluded from society, politically, economically, and their hopes of well-being, of welfare improvement, let alone prosperity, was certainly remote during that time. And of course the incursion was also to de-racialize, but I would argue de-racializing with the ultimate aim that people just want to see security, security of shelter, security in terms of having the capacity to nourish their bellies each day and to raise their children in a wholesome, meaningful and safe way. So when we engage the ideals, the aspiration and the principles of the Freedom Charter today, we may be asking to be free of bad leaders. We may be asking for the freedom to be bereft of vested interest. We may be asking for the freedoms to be free of the type of economic policies that are presented in the name of the masses, but really seek to, in some instance, position advantage for some minority groups. Some groups who want to have their opportunity of advancement, but may have foregone those original ideas of a national sharing, a national advance, of poverty alleviation in its genuine articulation, and of a genuine sense of limiting the extent of inequality in society. And I think that is what we should be grappling with today. While certainly celebrating that the Charter represents a very elegant way to express it, that lodestone, that cornerstone, that anchor of what we started out for, what the elders in my respects hoped and sought to realize in their lifetimes, and taking that as the anchor, as a beacon, and shining a spotlight on contemporary society, contemporary policy choices, that policies, whether it is the budget, whether it is the industrial programs that emanate out of the development and out of the DTI, or even whether it is the black economic empowerment policies that genuinely seek to have a national tide wash in that buoys everybody, or whether it is more privileged in its intent under the guise of broad-based economic gains. So Ebrahim, I'll pause there. I hope I've been sufficiently brief, but I wanted to complement, I guess, the remarks that my fellow panelists made at the outset in attempting to bring a sense of pragmatism, but a contemporary engagement with respect to how we deal with these issues.
Thanks, Goolam. We'll go into a second round, and I mean now it's less about what you've prepared and more about your actual gut thoughts. Because I mean I think this is an opportunity for us to take this discussion forward. And in its short existence, relatively short compared to other foundations, the Kathrada Foundation has been at the forefront of thinking around non-racialism. There's no reason why it shouldn't be at the forefront of thinking around changing the economy. So let's do that. This is not about what you've prepared. This is about what you know, and to invoke your fierce intellects and your passion for change. Let me start in reverse order. Stephen's written a fair bit about how we do actually need negotiation to get out of the current impasse. And Goolam, for you, what do you think would be the 3 or 4, however many, issues around which a negotiation is possible, firstly? And secondly, who do we negotiate with? I mean, labor appears to be, I don't know if crisis is the right word, but it might be the appropriate word. The state and government, response? You know, what are the 3 things or 4 things that we can actually negotiate on in the economy? And who are the suitable partners? I mean, we know it's labor, business, and maybe we should go to Mandla. But those don't appear to be bringing anything out. I mean, the national health insurance is still something we're waiting for. So just your gut response, what do you think 3 or 4 issues are, and who are these partners that we can find to negotiate the economy?
Ebrahim, I wonder whether the aspiration for the social compact that draws in all the social groups across broad swathes of society is too rich, too substantial, and too far-reaching a goal. I fear it is unlikely that we will be able to forge the elegance of such a gathering and find not just easy answers, but reconcilable positions. I sense also there is such ideological strain, divide, detachment, and maybe also a reluctance in some parties to actually commit to such an outcome, that perhaps we need to be a little bit more tactical in the manner in which this way forward, this journey, is charted. One that perhaps requires, and not to remotely suggest some Asian model, but rather than seeking a consensus, given the polarity that exists, given the divides that currently manifest, given the loss of life, which frequently ties into the way we as South Africans sometimes negotiate, and not about big policies and policy choices, just about the price of labor. We cannot reconcile with one another of the price of a wage without it incorporating large swathes of violence, sometimes the loss of life. So I wonder aloud in this forum whether sometimes we need the type of leadership that crystallizes, is able to crystallize, enunciate the challenges that we face, to hark back to the days of reconciliation under Nelson Mandela, to be able to, in the late 90s and 2000s, we celebrated the institutions which greatly took shape in South Africa and that gave us a sense of organization. Whether we simply have an assertiveness at a leadership level that boldly thrusts forth, and dare I say even bypasses some formations, not to suggest that their ideas are of a lesser import or lesser value, but we're losing time. We're losing time not just because there are so many South Africans that are economically and socially excluded, but we're losing time because the world's moving on. The world's moving on at a very rapid pace. You now have, for example, emerging markets safely occupying at least half of the world's production. You also have new swathes, new nodes of not just supply, but areas where people are enjoying brisk incomes. You have technology and its very forceful impact. We're competing with 1 billion Indians and 1 billion Chinese who are out working and have aspirations and have this hope for a future that is far more materially superior and also far more global than their parents. You're alongside another 1 billion Africans who over the last 20 years have arguably enjoyed the best period of economic performance and perhaps the first glimmer of real quality change if they could pursue the path of continued reforms that they would have experienced in the last 60 years. So these are the challenges that South African, especially the youth, face in a world where aggregate demand or just general growth is weak, and there's very little that we as South Africans can continue to rely on from the so-called Mandela dividend. Because capital, whether we like it or don't, is promiscuous, is fluid, and we're functioning in that world, whatever our domestic policy choices. Unlike apartheid, which for a while was able to survive because of an insular model, precisely at the end, its failure was that insularity was certainly never going to guarantee sustainability and inevitability. And similarly, some of the type of dogma that we espouse in South Africa and are able to get away with because of the closed nature of our market, people vote nationally, and policy making is national for the most part. It needs to be imbibed with a global reality, and it was in that context that Bertolt Brecht said.
That's a very pragmatic but rich answer, which Stephen, I mean, you've been arguing in your columns and in your other work, academic work, about the fact that negotiation is the only way out. I mean, is Goolam just speaking from the perspective of the rational actor, private sector, who wants to maximize gain and reduce cost? Or is this just a product of path dependency, as you were talking about earlier? It's just inevitably how the historical path pans out.
Well, I think Goolam's allowed to be a rational actor if he wants to be. I don't have beef with that. I think just to respond to what Goolam was saying, I agree with him, and I think it's very important to clarify this. I agree with him entirely that this kind of social compact thing is a problem. In the sense that I think that most people who punt it have a sense that what is going to happen is that various actors are going to get into a conference venue and thrash out a deal which is going to save us for the next 50 years, and this is clearly bizarre. What I'm talking about would not happen in a conference room. When one talks about negotiation, you're not talking about some huge compact. You're talking about people using power, but using power at the same time that they recognize that they are dependent on the people they're interacting with. And we've had such deals in the past, not on the big issues, but you have deals on that which you are capable of reaching agreement on, and then you use them as a basis on which to proceed. I think the real question which is raised, which I would throw at Goolam, and I'm not sure that I know the answer, is who's actually available to make any compromises at the moment? Because I don't see any particular propensity to compromise. I mean, you're talking about fat documents over there. I mean, right on the top of my mind is the fact that the fattest document the world has ever seen is the Farm Commission report, which I have to read through over this weekend. And that's important because one of the things that worries me is that Marikana was 2 years ago. I don't think our major social and economic actors have shifted an inch since Marikana. And that's scary, that's worrying. So I think it's far more a question of, are people prepared to shift, but then are we going to arrive at some social compact? Because if people are prepared to shift, if people are prepared to ask a very basic question, which is, when I interact maybe with business audiences, but I guess I'd throw it at labour audiences and some others as well. It's just a simple case of